Welcome to the Alcohol Free Life podcast, brought to you by thesoberclub.com. I'm Janie Lee Grace. This is for you if you've quit the booze or you'd like to, or maybe you're just sober curious. I'll bring you tips and motivation without any judgment, and there'll be inspiration from experts, quit-lit authors, and sober heroes. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. I hope you're well, and it's been a very big week for me. The release of the memoir, the long-awaited From Wham to Woo, A Life on the Mic. And obviously I've been doing lots of interviews, and we had a fabulous launch. Lovely to see Claire Pooley. It's so nice when one of your favourite authors also rocks up to the launch of your book. So that was fantastic. Many of you know Claire Pooley, of course, and you know that because of the Sober Diaries, that's the reason I'm doing what I do. So I'm a really big fan of Claire's work. I love her novels as well. They're fantastic. And she wrote me some lovely lines of praise for the book, and came along to the launch, which was fantastic. And we kicked off the little bookshop tour. So we've got a whole bunch of dates still to come. The next one is Wednesday, the 30th in Spalding in Lincolnshire. We're at a place called Bookmark. So great to support these independent bookshops, really. Try and come if you can. And then the week after that, there's a whole bunch of other dates. So check it out at janieleegrace.com, and you'll see the links there. So I just wanted to share some thoughts with you this week on the podcast, because obviously doing some of these interviews has made me even more conscious than I was before, I suppose, about all of the things in my past that have led me to where I am. You know, I've spoken many times about my only regret being that I wish I'd quit alcohol sooner. You know, I really do believe that. But it's been interesting doing some interviews for this memoir, for me to sort of see some of the patterns and the themes, you know, in my own life, and that sort of coincided with me writing a piece for Substack that got quite a big reaction. So I thought what I'd do this week is share some of that post with you. So it's very relevant, I hope, to whatever stage you're at, because if you're kind of sober curious, you'll find this very interesting. If you've been sober for a few weeks, you will hopefully definitely find it interesting. And if you've been sober for absolutely ages, I would be super interested to know your experience of what I'm going to talk about. And it's all about how we step into a new identity and how we become who we really are. So it was only really in the last couple of weeks since I've been doing these radio interviews that it's occurred to me that a lot of the presenters have asked this similar questions. You know, they're bound to, aren't they? Obviously, they ask about my days as a backing singer with Mary Wilson and Wham, and touring the world, going to China, and all of that stuff that's in the book, of course. And they talk about my 24 years with Steve Wright and Radio 2, and you know, so obviously we do all that stuff. But then most presenters have said, well, okay, tell us a bit more about the woo in the title, you know, where you allude to holistic living and the whole spirituality piece and the sort of transformation into the other work that you do. And most people have kind of asked about that. And it's been really interesting to kind of to see their perception. Most people have said when they've read the book, they picked out straight away that I'd been a bit of a hustler, if you like, throughout my life. And I'm not sure if that's a slightly negative way of putting it. I don't think it was done in a negative way. I think it was really more a case of I think I was a manifester. I think I was manifesting stuff long before I knew what the word meant, long before I'd come across anything to do with manifestation. I was absolutely setting my intentions, and I was so determined to go after what I figured I wanted. And that's been a kind of pattern all through my life, really. And it was very interesting to kind of look back on it. And I was looking back and trying to remind myself when did that start and how did that kind of come about? And I kind of reminded myself, really, that this definitely wasn't handed to me on a plate. I didn't have parents who were brimming over with positivity, not at all. In fact, my dad, his mantra used to be, never expect anything. Don't ever expect anything good to happen, and then you won't be disappointed when it doesn't, right? Don't set the bar too high, in other words. Don't have any high expectations, because then if something good were to happen, that will be a nice surprise for you. Wow. Now, when I look back and I think about that, gosh, no wonder he, bless his heart, he's passed away now, but he didn't make enough of himself. He didn't live his life to the full. I think that's fair to say. I don't think that's just me being mean. I think it's honestly the truth. And it's sad. It's really sad. And I look back and I realize he kind of passed that negativity onto me, and I had to work unbelievably hard to kind of shake that off. And I was trying to think back to when I was able to do that. And I think it was around the time that I'd just started becoming interested in sort of natural, eating well, good nutrition, starting to kind of think about mindset, and just opening up to the kind of holistic picture, if you like, very, very early days. And then I came across Louise Hay, of course, was the founder of Hay House Publishing. And I think Louise Hay's books, You Can Heal Your Life, was one of the first books I read on holistic living, and it completely blew me away. It really did. And I think that was the first time I realized, Louise Hay used to talk about the power of affirmations. And that was the first time I figured, well, I've got nothing to lose. Why don't I set my intention instead of, expecting the worst? And I think that's probably where it began. And, from that point on, I was able to kind of try and go after the things that felt super important to me. And I think some of this links to the article that I wrote last week called Stepping into a New Identity, The Power of Becoming You. And I started the piece after I'd seen a post on the Sober Club where somebody said, I really don't know who I am anymore. I might have mentioned this on the podcast last week, so forgive me if I'm repeating that bit. But somebody said, I don't know who I am anymore. And it's such a common sentence to hear for people who are just starting out, after a long, if they're ending really that long relationship with alcohol. And so many of the people that I work with, so many of the clients or people in the Sober Club are really finding it hard in the early days, in the early weeks, to decide what it is they want. It's all very well talking about manifesting and setting goals, but often we don't know what we want, particularly if we're in those early weeks of ditching the booze, because we feel so unbelievably raw and exposed, and they find themselves pondering, so, okay, I've been invited to a party. Well, shall I go? Well, it's almost a case of who will I go as, right? And of course we've got Halloween coming up, and my daughter is saying, what shall I go as, right? And I think it's exactly like that in the early weeks of quitting the booze. We're kind of asking ourselves, okay, it really is that trick or treat. That's what alcohol is, isn't it? It's, trust me, it's definitely not a treat. But we're kind of saying, who do I go as now? We know full well that in the past we would go, as it were, as the party girl, the party guy, the one that everybody knows knocks back all the booze, the one who is, usually getting another round in before anyone's even finished, the one who finishes off everybody else's drinks. I mean, we would have gone as that person, right? And never would have given it a thought. We wouldn't even kind of have a conversation with ourselves about who that person was. It's just what we did, right? We just rocked up. But when we quit alcohol, that kind of skin, that outer layer, that mask has to come off. And it's huge. It's huge when that happens, because we really don't know what we're rocking up as. We don't know which part of us we're putting on show. We don't know how we're going to present ourselves. And really, it's tricky. I can't deny it's tricky. So for those of you who are kind of week one, you're probably thinking, oh, God, she's really not making this, seem very attractive. You got to trust me, it gets better. It really does. And what I wrote in this piece was that, and you've heard me say this a lot of times on this podcast, but the truth is that ditching the booze is literally the best thing you will ever do for your health and well-being. It's much more than a wellness trend. It's much more than, putting on a different outfit. It's literally about becoming the new you, or perhaps a better way of saying that is reclaiming the real you, right? The real you that has probably been buried for years and years and years under that haze of toxicity and under that anxiety. But the reality is, if you have been drinking for years, this doesn't happen instantly. And that's obvious. Anything, worth doing, it takes a bit of time, right? We have to be a little bit patient. We have to take time to step into those shiny new sober shoes and kind of find them a way for them to fit. And again, you've heard me say this a lot of times, the best way to do this is to focus only on everything we're gaining along the way and try and remind ourselves to stop and feel the excitement of it and all the excitement of what's going to come, what's going to be there for us. And it is all going to be okay. I mean, better than okay, really. So stepping into a new identity, I really believe it's one of the most incredible transformative pieces that comes along with sobriety. And if you have been sober for a long time, I'd love it if you would drop me a message or just message me on social media and tell me whether you believe that, whether you think that it has transformed you, whether it's literally been transformative to step into a new identity for you. Because if you're early days, it's important for you to know that it's not only about stopping that behavior, it's about stepping into this new identity and asking yourself, okay, so who am I without it? Who am I without that toxic, drug? Who am I without that crutch that I've been relying on, without that alleged moment of pleasure that helps to numb me out, apparently? This is where the true work begins, really, because it's not about quitting the drink. It's about discovering who we want to be, wanting to live our best lives. And no one who really wants to live their best life wants to underpin that with toxic liquid. For me, I've said on this podcast, I've told my journey into sobriety. It was almost 7 years ago now. And I really felt as though I was on an emotional roller coaster for the first few weeks. I felt incredibly raw. I didn't tell anyone. I did rock up to parties and events, but I just hated it. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't wait to get away, to be honest. And I was a little bit scared of my own shadow. I now realize I could have made it easier for myself, right? So that's why I want to share some of this stuff with you. So one of the things that I talk about on my sober coach training is this really important kind of idea that emotions, not logic, inspire action. It's emotions rather than logic that fuel the change. And the reality is most of us have been around the block a few times, right, before we quit for good. I spoke to Jennifer on the podcast, last week, and she, what an incredible journey. She'd stopped, but then she'd gone back to drinking, and we hear this story so many times, and it's almost as though when people do go back to drinking after having been sober for a long time, once they quit again, once they quit for good, then they often look back and they recognize that while they were dry, that expression, they were not drinking, they were not drinking, but they were spending the whole time feeling deprived. They were spending the whole time not focusing on anything good, not focusing on what they were gaining, not enjoying living their best life without the booze and putting the work in and focusing on the personal growth. They were just trapped in that terrible kind of spiral of negativity where they felt as though they were missing out. And that's exactly what happened with Jennifer, my guest last week, when she was talking about how she quit for a long time, but then when a tragedy happened in her life, she was straight back down the booze elevator and actually hit rock bottom, ended up in rehab. And now, of course, as you heard, if you heard the podcast last week, she's on this glorious journey of self-discovery and using writing as a therapeutic tool. And she is invested now in her own personal growth, and she's literally feeling all the feels. And I remember being confused, when I first stopped drinking. I couldn't quite, or certainly before I stopped drinking, I couldn't quite work out if I was, relatively successful. I could, do a lot of the things I put my mind to. Why couldn't I just stop drinking? Or if I did stop drinking, why did I keep going back to it? And so that, got me to thinking about this question of why it is sometimes really difficult for people to change just by making that decision to change and having the logic, the thoughts around what's logic and rational. So what I mean by that is I knew back then that alcohol was not serving me. I knew that alcohol wasn't good for me. I'm not quite sure if I fully believed that even one glass was terrible, but I did know it wasn't serving me. I did know that logically it would be a good idea for me to stop. But the second the going got tough, the second the wine witch popped up and said, "Oh, come on, you deserve a nice cold, glass of wine," I was literally straight back in that alcohol trap. And the truth is that was because I was feeling in that moment, I was feeling that desire to feel differently, whatever it is, whatever feeling I wanted. I had the thought, I really want to feel differently, whatever that might be. I want to feel rewarded. I want to feel grown up. I've had a really busy day. I want to feel relaxed, chilled, whatever the hell it is. And somehow we managed to equate alcohol with the power of doing all those things, which is absolute BS, by the way. But that's kind of how the unconscious mind works, because we've all been programmed to believe that. So what would happen for me is, even though I knew what was right, I knew what I should do. I knew that not drinking made me feel better. But that was the logic. That was the thought process. That was the knowledge. And really the reality is that emotions govern our behavior. We're first and foremost, we're emotional beings. We often know what's right, what's better for us, what we should do. We should on ourselves, as the expression goes. But unless we have that emotional connection to that vision of ourselves, the change will remain elusive. We've got to find a way of connecting the emotion with the logic so that we can tap into the emotion behind the desire for transformation. And that's when we can, that's when it can start to work. That's what gives us the fuel, that gives us the momentum. Once we can have the belief and the excitement about becoming someone new, that's when it becomes possible. When it's merely a case of someone has told you, you must stop drinking. Well, for many of us, there's a rebellious streak. And as soon as push comes to shove, it's like, well, sod that. I just go back to where I was before. So it's really important that when we quit alcohol, we recognize it's not just about giving up a habit. It's literally about stepping into this new identity. And it's an identity where we've got to actually face life head on, and we've got to face challenges and emotions in a different and a healthier way. And that's tough sometimes because, we don't have a lot of emotional maturity, most of us. We've been drinking for years, probably started when we were, in our teens. And so all the big stuff, every bit of big stuff in our life has been through the haze of booze. Scary, right? So when we stop, we have to literally kind of recognize that we're going to learn to navigate situations sober, social situations, stress, whatever that might be, because, life happens. And we have to be able to navigate those things without numbing ourselves. And the idea really is that we can begin to uncover deeper layers of our own authenticity, of our own authentic self. And I know that sounds a bit floaty, but once you actually discover who you really are, we can deal with that. It's when you're hiding, it's when there's a secret. Secrets are really hard. We talk about this in family constellations sometimes. When people are carrying a secret, there's a huge amount of pressure around a secret because you have to remember what the secret is, the lie. If you're living some kind of lie, or you're trying to protect something, or part of you is just not authentic with who you really are, it's really stressful. It really impacts on you because it's a burden to have to carry a secret, or to have to try to constantly tell a lie, to have to remember the lie. And when something is true, it's just true. You don't have to put any effort in. It just is true. And that's why there's so much authenticity around truth. Because whether or not someone agrees with your truth, they have to acknowledge that it is the truth. And that's back to my memoir. I feel exactly like that with the memoir. I mentioned last week, I am nervous about kind of getting terrible reviews and people saying awful things about it. But ultimately, it's my truth. The book's my truth. Every single thing I've written in there is true. So, you might not like it, might not square up to your values, but it's who I was. Certainly back then, it's who I was. It was the authentic me. Although, having said that, for awful lot of years, I was drinking way too much, so I wasn't really authentic. But you know what I mean. When you can focus on the truth, that's when you can link to that authentic piece. So the emotions, not logic, inspire action piece, I think is really important. And most of you are aware of Tony Robbins, of course, and Tony Robbins' work. And he said, emotion is the force of life. Logic doesn't inspire action. Emotions do. And that's the key. That's the profound truth. When we think about breaking free from old habits, whether that's, being dependent on alcohol, whether it's smoking, whatever the old habit is, when we consider that journey and start to wonder, who will we be without it? Logic will get us, some of the way. It's good to have some logic. It really is. It's good to know how bad alcohol is. And logic will get us a little way down the line. It will tell us what we should do. But it's the emotional drive. It's the motivation. It's the desire for something better that will actually propel the action. We're humans. We seek pleasure. We want things to be good. We do ultimately want a better life. And if we can catch sight of that without alcohol, that's the power. That's the magic. And this is the bit I knew I'd get to it in the end. This is the bit I really wanted to share with you, because I wrote about this in the blog post, and I just thought it was magical. And that's something that I saw that Joe Dispenza had talked about. If you're not aware of Joe Dispenza's work, wow, you're in for a treat. Go look him up. Amazing guy. And Joe Dispenza was talking about the power of becoming, this whole, stepping into a new identity. And he often speaks about, the power of the mind, obviously, the amazing shifts that can occur when we literally embody a new way of being. It's all about, as I say, stepping into that new identity, embodying it. And Joe was part of a study, or he talks about this study, which was a really fascinating experiment done with elderly men. I don't know if it was in a care home, but they asked these elderly guys to live and behave as if they were 22 years old again. And so for 5 days, they played these guys the music that would have been around when they were 22. They put pictures on the walls of Marilyn Monroe and various icons, and they were dancing, and they were playing card games, and they were doing things that they might have done when they were 22. They got newspapers from that era, and they were looking at kind of news headlines and talking about the stuff that would have been back in the day, back at that time. And they did that for 5 days. And before they did the experiment, they gave the guys all kinds of tests, all kinds of cognitive tests, physiological tests. They literally measured all kinds of stuff. And at the end of the 5 days, and there was some footage that I saw of these guys having a lovely time, kind of dancing and hanging out as if they were 22. And when they did the tests again at the end of the 5 days, they found the results were literally astonishing. These guys their cognition had improved, their mobility had improved. I mean, bizarrely, even their fingertips had grown longer, their fingers had grown longer. I mean, seriously, they've actually grown longer fingers, right? Their physical appearance improved. They were so much happier. It was really off the scale. So, what does this show us? Because, we're not all going to get to be able to be part of an experiment like that, though it sounds fun. What it tells us, what it shows us, is the sheer power of belief, and how profoundly our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions can shape our reality. So by stepping into that new identity, it wasn't just a case of, the guys weren't just kind of saying to themselves, right, fingertips, grow, why don't you? Legs, walk a little faster. They weren't just telling themselves to do something. They weren't just issuing commands. They were pretending to be younger. They were acting as if they were already, back in that identity. And they were becoming younger, even if only temporarily. And it's just incredible how everything improved, and it was as if their bodies and their minds responded positively to this new identity. They completely embraced it. So it's not a case of, as I say, just thinking the changes into happening. They had to become the change. And this is exactly what happens when we make the decision to change a behavior, when we make the decision to become the person that we aspire to be, then that's when the reality starts to shift. It's such a fabulous study. I love the whole idea of it, because it really kind of helps you to realize that it's the acting as if, it's the living as if, it's the embodying that really makes the difference. And this is, if you're thinking, she's barking and this is all just completely woo-woo, it really isn't. There is a neuroscience around transformation. Science absolutely supports the idea that we have the ability to rewire our brains. It really does. And again, Joe Dispenza talks a lot about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to literally form new neural connections throughout our life. It's not static. It's literally malleable. And when we quit a habit, like drinking, we can literally rewire our brain. We really can. That's what's really powerful. And when we step into that new identity, if you like, of a non-drinker, a healthier, happier version of myself, our brain will start to make that our new reality. We'll start to become who we are. And that's why the emotional connection, I think, is so critical. When we emotionally invest in that new identity, it's like the brain's wiring starts to change. It starts to look for new connections, and it really starts to reflect this new concept of ourselves, our new self-concept, if you like. So we stop seeing ourselves as this poor, bloated victim who struggles with alcohol. And we start seeing ourselves as someone who is going to live with intention and presence and vitality and be as healthy as it's possible to be. And that's a massive shift. And that is driven by the emotion. It's driven by the motivation, by the desire to feel better. It's not driven by the intellectual analysis or the logic on its own. So becoming who you are, becoming who you want to be, it's about, stepping into that identity of the person we want to become. And you might not know yet, right? You might have had a lot of years wondering what the hell is going on. But when we take alcohol away, we remove something from our lives, but then we can start to gain that clear sense of who it is we really are without the fog. It's quite exciting, if you really don't know who you are, it's quite exciting to discover it. And I tell you one thing for certain, I have never met anyone who preferred themselves drunk. I've never met anyone who says, oh man, I really liked how I was, 10 years ago. So it's all about feeling it. It's all about connecting emotionally to who we want to become. It's all about behaving as if we are already that person. That's the key to unlocking the transformation and becoming that change kind of from the inside out. So whatever stage you're at, really stepping into that new chapter of your life, it's your emotions. It's not just the logic. Do the logic, because it's important that you know just how bad alcohol really is. So, do that logic piece, but then realize it's the emotions that are going to carry you forward. So if you tap into that feeling of who it is you want to become. What is it that you want? And act as if you're already that person. And that's when it starts to happen for you. So a few probably very obvious tips, in case you're thinking, well, that's all very well, Janie, but got no idea where to start. Number one is to literally visualize your future self. So, visualization works. We've spoken about this on the podcast before. Everyone knows that athletes use visualization. They use visualization to see themselves beating their own best time or whatever it might be in their particular field. They visualize themselves doing well. And we can literally spend a few minutes each day visualizing the person that we want to become. And it's that simple. Close your eyes, imagine yourself living that life. What will your habits be? What do you look like? How do you carry yourself? How do you actually feel? When you visualize it, helps your brain create that mental blueprint. So it becomes easier to align your current actions with that future version of yourself that you can imagine. And that's the act as if bit. So acting as if you're already that future version of yourself. So if you really want to be more, more confident, more outgoing, then just give that a little go. And you can always pretend you're acting and give yourself a little Oscar at the end of the night. Just act confidently. If you want to be healthier, most people do, then start making the choices straight away. Make the choices that align with that identity. Because when you do that, when you behave in line with that person that you want to become, that kind of reinforces it all. And then number 3 is surrounding yourself with support. Note that in that study that Joe Dispenza referenced, it wasn't just one guy on his own doing this. It was so much easier because there were other people, there were connections there, and your environment will play a huge role in shaping who you become as well. And I know that one's not always easy, because we can't always surround ourselves only with supportive people and spaces that reflect what the identity we want, especially if we're quitting the booze. And I've got one of my clients who actually, her partner runs a pub, so it's actually really difficult because literally the environment isn't conducive to what she wants to become. But nevertheless, there's always ways. There's always a way. You can spend time with people who inspire you. You can read quick lit that inspires you, that feeds the growth, if you like. You can absolutely join us in the Sober Club, because online connections are fabulous too. And you can start to create that physical environment for you that will align with the person you're going to become, even if it's as simple as, okay, get yourself a yoga mat and lay that out and make that's your little space, right? And then there's the way of embracing the small daily changes. And I think this is the bit that I used to get stuck on. I think I used to think that I needed huge transformation, huge things to happen straight away, and then I'd get very disappointed when they didn't. But it's not really quite like that. I really know now for sure that the big transformation happens through the consistent small steps. It's those tiny pieces. It's the kind of moments of the little blessings, the moments of gratitude. That's what makes a difference. So instead of trying to do a massive life overhaul overnight, literally, just start with the small manageable pieces, the things that align with your desired identity. If you want to be more mindful, then just do 5 minutes of mindfulness or meditation. I used to kind of beat myself up, because if I couldn't do 20 minutes morning and night, then I'm hopeless, I better not do any. But I now realize that actually just doing something for 5 minutes is absolutely better than not doing it at all. And then number 5 is feeling the emotions of your future self. And as we've already said, emotion is the driving force of change. So we have to try and imagine how it will feel. How will it feel to live as your future self? How will we feel that joy and confidence and fulfillment? And the more emotionally connected we are to our future self, then, the more motivated we can feel. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but things like laughter yoga, that was popular so many years ago when I very first got into kind of holistic living, people were doing laughter yoga. But I know it happens again now. And I remember in my grumpy state many years ago, I used to think, well, how goddamn ridiculous. You're actually going to get me to kind of sit cross-legged and force myself to laugh. And but actually, you know, it was me that had it wrong and they had it right, because it is that thing of fake it till you make it, or create it till you make it. So it doesn't have to be, you know, laughter yoga, but whatever you can do to actually get emotionally connected and start to feel how it's going to feel good. That sentence got an awful lot of feels in it, right? So yeah, it's super helpful to remind yourself that if you're ditching the booze, it's the best thing you'll ever do. You know, let's not sugarcoat it. It's drinking self-harming. Let's just be really clear. So ask yourself, how would it feel to be someone who loved and respected themselves? If you were someone who really loved and respected yourself, then of course you wouldn't self-harm, right? That would just be obvious. That's why it's not only about ditching the booze. It's about becoming you, becoming that person you want to be. And that person that you want to be would not want to self-harm, right? So it's that foundation that that underpins it all. Anyways, I hope that landed with some of you. You can read my article and check out Joe Dispenza's work if you hadn't come across Joe Dispenza before, and do join us in the Sober Club. You know, because we talk about this kind of stuff all the time in the Sober Club. We've got a huge member portal of meditations and all kinds of amazing stuff, movement, medicine, lots of incredible stuff in our archive in the Sober Club, and a really amazing sense of community. So that's really the powerful piece, is that cheerleading piece, when you know that there's someone who's got your back and there's someone who's been there, done it before. So they're a few steps ahead of you, or maybe they're a few steps behind, and actually by being part of the Sober Club, you can give back too. So anyways, check it out if you haven't already. And of course, I need to remind you of some of the dates coming up. I've got a whole book tour, a whole bunch of dates. I really hope you'll come and see me. It was fantastic to see a couple of podcast listeners at David's bookshop last week in Letchworth. Thank you so much for coming. It's so appreciated. I love meeting podcast listeners. And as I say, next week I'm going to Lincolnshire, to Spalding. The following week, I think I'm going to be in, I can't remember all the dates, but I'm going to the Wantage Literary Festival, doing the Louder Than Words Festival in Manchester. I'm going to Daventy, Rugby. These are just off the top of my head. And a whole bunch of others. Swansea, Milton Keynes, Birmingham. See, remembering them now. So it'd be really great to meet some of you. There's also a new date been put in place for Hampshire in January the 10th, going to be in Andover. So if you can't get to one of these early ones, then maybe you can get to one of those. So yeah, it'd be amazing to meet you on the book tour. Come and say hi. And then of course, Sunday, 24th of November is Family Constellations. All of this stuff that I've been talking about, you come to something like Family Constellations and it helps you get to that place quicker, because it helps give you a completely new perspective and it helps you shift something. It can often help you shift a block that you or perhaps didn't even know was there. So it's amazing work, really powerful work. Doesn't matter what stage you're at, everyone is welcome at Constellations. Sunday, 24th of November in Hertfordshire. So do come if you can. It'd be great to see you at that. And then the one absolutely not to miss is Monday, 2nd of December at Club Soda. It's our Christmas party, and it's a kind of another mini book launch for me. And Sam Delaney, who I did my book launch with, is going to come along. And I've got a few other guests as well. It's going to be a really fun night. We're going to do a live podcast recording. And I'm really hoping that there'll be a bunch of podcast listeners there, Sober Club members, a whole bunch of my sober coaches who have trained with me are going to be there. So that's Monday, 2nd of December. And again, that's at Club Soda. But for all of these events, if you just go to thesoberclub.com and click on events, you'll find everything there. Or if you go to janieleighgrace.com, you'll find the book tour dates. So just a reminder then, if all of that just made you feel even more overwhelmed, then just hang on in there, right? Hang on in there. It gets better, I promise you. And if you're doing this, if you've just been doing Sober October, by the way, well, fantastic. Well done you, but don't stop now. I mean, clearly, don't stop now. You've got all this lovely work to do to become who you really are. It would be crazy to go back to drinking. So if you've been doing Sober October and you're listening to this, then I'll hold that vision for you. Carry it right through to the end of January at least. And you'll be feeling very different, promise you. Don't forget, you can find me on social media at Janie Lee Grace. You know where I am. You know where to find me. If you do grab a copy of my book, by the way, From Wham to Woo, leave me a nice review. I'd appreciate that so much. Apparently, it makes a massive difference. So pop a review on Amazon for me, wherever you buy the book, because that makes a difference, to getting it out there, to a wider audience. I'd appreciate that a lot. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. It honestly means the world to me. I get some lovely messages from people who say that the podcast sometimes kind of helps them when they're feeling a bit down, and they like my positive spin on it. And I started this podcast by saying that I didn't start out like that. My upbringing was such that I was kind of recommended to, as I say, see the bad in everything, definitely not see the good in everything. And now I'm a regular Pollyanna, right? So I'll see you same time next week if I don't get to actually meet you before. I hope so. Thank you for listening to the Alcohol Free Life podcast, brought to you by the Sober Club. Please rate and review. And if you want support, accountability and inspiration, and you want to live your best life without the booze, check out thesoberclub.com.